All right, so we're going to get started. Good morning. My name is Laura Tuggle. I'm the Executive Director with Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. And I also am joined by Hannah Adams, one of our staff attorneys in our litigation and advocacy unit, who has tons of experience on housing issues, and Constance Toole, our staff attorney in our employment and benefits unit. And today we're going to probably take an hour and 15 minutes or so to cover some hot topics regarding disaster legal issues related to the Hurricane Ida. So we're just going to jump right into it. The things we're going to cover today, we're going to review the FEMA Individual and Household Assistance Program. Sometimes it's called the IA program through FEMA. We're going to cover applying for FEMA, some tips for the FEMA process, how to deal with FEMA claim denials, and the appeal process. I'm going to cover those topics. Then Constance is going to talk about the disaster unemployment insurance program, which has been activated for Hurricane Ida, and also how to replace SNAP benefits, food stamp benefits, and she's going to talk about also the disaster food stamp program. And then Hannah's going to round things out, doing a review of renters' rights after Hurricane Ida and also the COVID pandemic. So just a disclaimer, this is just general information we're providing in this presentation. It's not intended to represent legal advice. We are recording this and it will be posted in a couple of different places that in case you want to access this, we'll put it wherever we can put it. I'll have to rely on my communications and development director to figure that out, but I think it will be available on our blog. And if you do need individual assistance on any of these topics and many other types of civil legal issues, you can always call our COVID and 19 and disaster legal assistance hotline at 1-844-244-7871. So with that said, we're going to jump right into it. So by now, everybody knows that Hurricane Ida was declared as a major disaster. Whenever there is a major disaster, the president has to make an executive decision to declare it as such, and that allows different kinds of assistance to flow in a community from the federal government, in this case through FEMA. The application period, I'm a day off. I looked this up yesterday. It's 60 days, usually from the date of the declaration. It's actually October 28th. So that October 29th is actually an error. So we'll get that corrected. That it's very likely, because of the magnitude of this disaster, it could be extended, but that is currently the deadline. There are 25 parishes designated for the individual assistance program currently. They are all listed here. All the parishes in the greater New Orleans area, greater Baton Rouge area, North Shore, Houma, Thibodaux area. And then there's 3 parishes kind of outside SLLS's service area in St. Martin, St. Mary, and also Iberia Parish. Occasionally, FEMA will add parishes at a later date once damage assessments start coming in, but currently those are the only 25. So FEMA has really 2 major buckets of assistance. There is the temporary, there's different kinds of housing programs, and I'm going to go through those in a second. And then there's what they call other needs assistance, or ONA. So some of the examples of their housing assistance, it could be temporary housing. Sometimes that comes in the way of what FEMA calls direct housing assistance, where they actually provide housing themselves. And so that's usually like manufactured housing or something like that. They also do rental assistance if certain conditions are met for someone that's been impacted by a disaster. They usually will provide longer term rental assistance for a homeowner as compared to a renter, under the theory that a homeowner needs the time to fix their home to get back in it, and that a tenant can find another place to rent, and that they won't need the assistance as long. Some of those assertions don't really play out that way in real time, but that is sort of their thinking around how that rolls out. So it usually starts out with either 1 to 3 months of assistance for rental assistance if it's approved for an individual, and then families can request extensions if they have a continuing need. If you're a homeowner, FEMA may approve you for home repair assistance. It is likely never enough to replace everything, but they do have some funds for home repair assistance for eligible homeowners. They will sometimes put some funds towards what they call replacement housing, trying to help someone replace housing. A lot of times that may happen with a trailer or manufactured housing, because their maximum limits on housing assistance is $36,000, although very few people get that much money. So obviously you couldn't replace most homes for that amount of money. FEMA also has, there is a relationship between FEMA and the Small Business Administration. So the Small Business Administration, in addition to serving business owners, has a low-cost loan program that is available to folks impacted by a disaster to either help them rebuild their home or to replace personal property. So it's kind of counterintuitive that an individual who is not a business owner would be having to potentially make a loan to recover through the Small Business Administration. Folks, the folks that usually get referred by FEMA to the SBA to see if they can be approved for a loan to help them recover for disaster, it's usually a function of looking at income reported on your disaster application. If FEMA thinks that you have an ability to repay based on your reported income, then you may get referred to the SBA as opposed to just getting basically a grant from FEMA that you won't have to repay. And then they may have other programs to help. So within that other needs assistance, for example, that could be funds to help replace personal property lost, a flooded car, a tree fell on your car. It could also be for things like if you lost medical equipment that got damaged by the disaster. And then sometimes they roll out other kinds of special assistance programs for particular disasters, which we're going to talk about in just a second here. So some of the 3 special programs they have rolled out, one for Hurricane Ida, one is a critical needs assistance program. It has been approved for $500 per household as a one-time award. And it is for really just like basic necessities that come in the immediate wake of a disaster: water, food, first aid, prescriptions, diapers, formula, medical supplies, fuel for transportation, fuel for generators, those kinds of things. Another program they rolled out is their generator and chainsaw reimbursement program. So this program is for the purchase or rentals of a generator or chainsaw between August 26th and September 25th, 2021. You have to spend it first and then request reimbursement. And it can have already been covered by insurance or some other source. And we're going to talk more in a little bit about how insurance comes into play with FEMA claims. There's max limits. $800 is max for a generator. $250 is the max for a chainsaw. So the last one we're going to mention for IDA is the transitional shelter assistance. So this has to be requested by states, by the governor of a state when there's a major disaster. Louisiana did ask for this FEMA to activate this program, which they did, I think on September 1st or 2nd. And so basically, this is a temporary lodging program. It may also be called like a hotel program where if somebody is deemed an eligible disaster survivor, they could stay, I think, for up to, well, it's going to depend on the individual situation, how long you could stay if you're approved, but it's really tied to whether your home is uninhabitable, which could be related to not having power, or inaccessible due to Hurricane Ida. So there are direct payments from FEMA to the hotel if this is not covered by insurance or some other source. You have to use a hotel that's been approved, that's on FEMA's list, which you can find at that link below. And also you can get that, I believe it's also on FEMA's website too. FEMA will not pay, they're only going to cover the cost of the room and taxes. Anything else like room service or getting something through the concierge desk or telephone calls made on the hotel phone, none of that is going to be included. So it's really just for the basics, and you do have to use an approved hotel on their list. So FEMA has a number of eligibility requirements for assistance. You do have to be either a United States citizen, a non-citizen national, or qualified alien. Those are their words, for a cash award from FEMA's individual and households program. If you don't fall into one of those categories, but there is a United States citizen who is a minor child, or if there's another adult member of your household who meets those criteria, then you may qualify, the household could qualify for assistance. Another thing that you have to be able to, FEMA has to be able to verify is occupancy and ownership information if you were a homeowner. So you have to have lived in a disaster area within those declared parishes as your primary residence at the time of the disaster. So like if maybe you live in, I don't know, North Louisiana, but you have a fishing camp in Houma. You're not going to be able to get assistance for the fishing camp because it's not your primary residence. If you go back and forth between places, sometimes that can be an issue too. So the primary residence is the big issue there in the disaster zone. If you're a homeowner, you have to prove that you own the home for certain kinds of assistance. So sometimes FEMA can verify these things through public records they have access to, but sometimes they will need you to provide that information to them. So FEMA had a big announcement about a week ago regarding how they're going to verify occupancy and home ownership. So a lot of the things on this list had been here a long time, but there are some new things added near the bottom that are going to make things a bit more flexible. So the standard kind of things that FEMA will look at to confirm occupants could be utility bills, could be other kinds of bills that may come in your name at the disaster address. Maybe there's something from an employer that documents your address. If you have a lease with your name on it, if you can get a rent receipt that has your name and the address of the unit on it, identification, motor vehicle registration. Sometimes they will take an affidavit of residency, like a notarized affidavit. But some of the other things, some of the really new things, it could be a letter from a local school. It could be a letter from another benefit provider, like maybe a food stamp letter or a letter from Social Security or something like that in your name and at your address. And then the last one is the one that can really be lead to a lot of flexibility is letters from a social service organization that maybe someone is working with for some type of assistance. So it could be a letter from a nonprofit or a community assistance program. For folks that live in manufactured housing, there can be a signed statement from the mobile home park owner, and as a last resort, self-certification. So that self-certification can really be important too. Now, if you're a homeowner and maybe you're trying to get assistance for the home repair assistance, FEMA is going to look at some standard things. And the last few items on this list are the new ones that are really going to make things more flexible for disaster survivors. So, you know, you can document a home ownership sometimes through mortgage records, loan documents, deeds, insurance, property tax bills, contracts for deeds, an installment contract. Maybe you had a bond for deed and you're paying over time, a bill of sale potentially. And then the new things, like they can look at a will that maybe leaves you the property, or an affidavit of heirship. So that's in Louisiana, a process that you can go through to legally transfer title. And if they have that affidavit and a death certificate of the person who you inherited from, that might be enough. So that's new. Public officials' documents or letters or receipts for major repairs, like they can tell that you're the person taking care of the property. And as a last resort, FEMA will allow survivors in heirship properties or mobile homes, manufactured housing, who don't have traditional documentation to verify ownership through self-certification. That is a big change. It still might be a good idea to get that notarized. We're going to have to see how this works out, how flexible FEMA really is, because this literally just came out. This is the first disaster that they have announced this flexibility. So another thing that you need to be aware of is that FEMA is generally only going to provide assistance to one person per household, to one applicant per household. FEMA has this idea that everybody that was in a pre-disaster household together is going to stay together after a disaster. Sometimes disasters split families. Sometimes they split relationships. And so they will, if with good cause and reasonable documentation, they will sometimes provide multiple assistance, but you're probably going to get denied and have to submit an appeal or either additional documentation to support why FEMA should be providing assistance to people that were using the same pre-disaster address. This really tripped up a lot of large families and roommate situations, couple situations in prior disasters. It was a huge issue in Katrina and Rita. And so we expect that it is going to be problematic for some families now. One other thing that might be an issue, depending upon your situation, if you had, FEMA has what they call a flood bar. So if you got assistance from FEMA in a prior disaster, you are required to keep flood insurance on your property. And that applies to personal property and real property. So if you're a renter and you had damage to all of your personal belongings in a prior disaster, or some of your belongings, and you didn't maintain flood insurance, and now you're having more flooding from a new disaster, the flood bar may keep you from being able to get coverage for those items. Now, occasionally we have seen an address that FEMA, they have a lot of information in a massive database. So sometimes they will, a new person can move into an address that previously got assistance from FEMA, and you may just be a new person living there who wasn't bound by that rule. So occasionally that comes up. The best thing you can do, we're going to talk about that a little later, about how you can reach out for assistance and how you should work on appeals. So there is also this other requirement that FEMA has for their eligibility and insurance. So FEMA has, by federal law, they cannot pay for losses that are covered by another source. And that also includes insurance. So if you have renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance or flood insurance, and if you had damage to your car, maybe you had, insurance on your car, FEMA is going to want to see what happened with your insurance claim before they pay out. Now, if there's a big delay with your insurance claim, they sometimes will go ahead and approve you for FEMA, but then you have an obligation. If your insurance claim ends up covering some of the same damages, you have to pay FEMA back. So FEMA it's called a duplication of benefits rule. So they want to make sure that they're not paying for something that private insurance should be paying for. So if you reported on a FEMA claim that you have insurance, they're probably going to issue a denial. For example, in my case, I got my denial in 1 day, in 24 hours, because I have homeowners insurance. But you still want to go ahead, you want to start your insurance claim, and you want to go ahead and start your FEMA claim right after that, so that you get things going at the same time. And in my case, in a lot of other people's case, when you get a denial letter, you're going to need to respond to that. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. There's 3 ways to apply for FEMA: online, which is usually the best way, although FEMA has about 500,000 applications, which is the most applications it has received the fastest in any disaster. So it's really hard to get through online or on the phone. Sometimes it works better to do really off hours when you're trying to go online. That it's also easier to check on the status without having to wait through the phone lines, which are almost impossible to get through right now. There's also the phone number, and then you can apply through their app. So this slide has a ton of information going on. This is also all on the FEMA.gov website. A lot of FEMA's new requirements and updates. You can find out that on FEMA's website, and there's a Hurricane Ida tab, and that's going to have all the news releases, all the new updates to programs, and it's really helpful sometimes to be checking that too, so you can see what's changing with their own policies and procedures. So you're going to need to have your social security number. Email address is optional. I would probably want to include that. You're going to need your insurance information, damage information, your financial information, contact information, and if they approve you, you have the option to include direct deposit information from your bank with the name of your bank, type of account, your routing number, and your account number. And if you're approved, they can just drop the funds right in there. If you've lost your social security number or your card, you can request a new one from the Social Security Administration. You can do that online. You can't really walk into most Social Security offices these days, so it's really best to do that online. So some other tips for your FEMA claim: you want to save all documentation, and you're going to really want to save it a long time. We are still getting FEMA recoupment cases from Katrina. So you either want to scan it somewhere or keep it in a folder somewhere. because you might have to produce that information at a future date. You want to take pictures of your damages before you throw it out. So I know this sounds a little silly, but like if you're throwing out, you know, even food from a refrigerator, which you probably already have done, sometimes you want to take pictures of that. If you're throwing out clothes, furniture, all kinds of things, you want to try to document it so that you can show that you did in fact have it. If you're not sure about how to answer certain questions on your application, you really want to give accurate information. So it's best to get the answers before you complete the application. Don't submit multiple applications. That is going to create red flags with FEMA. So you really want one person in your household submitting unless you have some kind of special circumstance. Because you really don't, everybody needs help as fast as they can get it. So it's going to create problems if you do multiple applications. And just another thing to keep in mind, sometimes FEMA will send inspectors out to inspect damages. Sometimes they're able to estimate damages from GIS mapping or other kinds of reports in the neighborhood. But many times they still come out to homes and do inspections. So you may be getting calls from FEMA. You may be getting calls from contractors that FEMA has hired. You may be getting calls from your insurance company. And you may not recognize any of these phone numbers. They may be out of town numbers. And so if you're like a lot of folks, you may not be answering calls that you don't recognize the number. But while you're going through this recovery period, you want to be answering calls even from people whose numbers you don't recognize, because you don't want to slow down your own recovery. And there's likely going to be a lot of numbers that you don't know of folks just trying to process information. This is a warning if FEMA is a federal program. So if you make a false statement and it's deemed to be intentional, it could lead to criminal charges. And then even if there is potentially information in error, it is possible that FEMA could ask for money they gave you back. So that's another reason to keep your documentation. And you definitely can appeal those kind of actions as well. So even though we say here, keep your record 7 years, you might want to keep them even longer than that. So if you're denied FEMA assistance, don't panic. You always have a right to appeal. You really want to read your denial letter closely, or sometimes FEMA may just not be denying. They may just be asking for additional information. So if they're just asking for additional information, you want to provide that. But if it's a denial, you need to really put your best case together to support why FEMA should overturn its reason to deny you assistance. Some of the most common reasons for denial, maybe they can't document ownership or occupancy to their satisfaction. Maybe you had insurance and there's not been a decision on that claim yet. Those are the really quick denials that are coming out here near the beginning of this disaster. Maybe you inadvertently checked a box wrong and reported no damage, or maybe when you first registered, you didn't know what the situation with your home was. And, you know, if you report that you don't have damage, FEMA might not be able to approve you, or they may have determined that you had insufficient damage. And then stuff like that happens. Sometimes you need to get somebody to come in and do an estimate on repairs for you. Sometimes you can do more pictures. There's different ways to try to deal with that. FEMA may have determined your home is in fact safe to occupy. There's also that big shared household issue that disqualifies a lot of folks. So if you do get a denial letter, you have to do your appeal within 60 days. And even if your deadline has passed, you want to be sure to include in the letter an explanation of why your appeal is late. So you want to try to act on it as quickly as you can. And then you need to really explain why you disagree with the decision and make sure that you have supporting documents that back up whatever your claim is. You really should get the letter notarized if you can before you send it off. That is something FEMA recommends, but if you can't, you can include a sentence at the end where you say you declare under penalty of perjury that the information that you provided is true and correct, print your name, sign your name, and date it. If FEMA sent you a letter in the mail with your denial, then there'll be a cover sheet with a barcode, and you want to be sure to send that back with your appeal letter and every document that you have. So if you wind up with like a 20-page response, you know, maybe your appeal letter is a couple of pages and then maybe you have a bunch of documents to submit. You want to put your name, the disaster number, I think it's 4611, but it'll be on your letter. You will have an individual FEMA registration number assigned to you for your claim. So you want to write that on every page and the last 4 digits of your social security number. Another thing that I always add, if it's a really long document, if it's 20 pages, I will also write like page 1 of 20, page 2 of 20, and so forth on each page. One reason you want to do that is because FEMA is getting a ton of information and it's lots of paper. And sometimes people are faxing it, sometimes they're mailing it, and think papers can get separated. So you want to make your appeal letter as easy for the reviewer to review as possible, so that you can hopefully get the best outcome. So the different ways you can submit the appeal and the documents in support of it, you can upload it to your FEMA account if you did an online application or you created a FEMA account at www.disasterassistance.gov, or you can fax it to 1-800-827-8112. In the event that FEMA opens disaster recovery centers, you can bring it there. That is actually probably the best way to try to communicate with somebody. These appeals, you've never talked with anybody about it. You don't meet with anybody about it. You don't get a hearing with a judge or a hearing officer. It's all done just by paper. So that's why you have to make your case as strong as possible. If you ever get the opportunity, if there is a live in-person disaster recovery center, sometimes going in and talking to another human being is the best way to try to turn something around, because that may be the only opportunity to have a face-to-face interaction. It's lots harder to, it's easier for folks to explain themselves many times rather than writing really long letters. And it's harder to tell people no if you are in person. But there may not be that many. FEMA is sort of getting away from doing as many DRCs as they used to. And we have heard from FEMA that they will be opening some, but not until early October. And we're not sure where they will be located, but they'll probably be in the most heavily impacted areas. You can also mail your appeal to the address. It'll be on the paperwork that FEMA sends you. I don't think I would do all of these. I think maybe pick one, maybe 2, but I certainly would not do all of them. One advantage to doing it by fax is that you can get a fax confirmation receipt. Obviously, if you upload it, you'll be able to have documentation of that as well. If you decide to mail, be sure to make a copy of your entire package before you mail it off. you want to make, in case it gets lost, or FEMA says they don't have it, something like that, you want to have your copy. Be sure to sign and date your letter at the end. And if you need assistance, an attorney may be able to help you. SLLS is a nonprofit civil legal aid organization. And if you are eligible for our services, we will be helping with FEMA appeals. So to apply for help, you can call that number again, 1-844-244-7871. We are very overwhelmed with calls right now. So we try to get back to people within 48 hours, but we did, like everybody else, we had impacted staff. So I think things are going to get a little more settled next week, but you can definitely call that number and someone will get back to you as soon as possible. Be sure to submit all of your documentation with the letter and keep FEMA updated if your mailing address or your contact information changes. That's really important too. You can call in and check on the status of your application once you can get through on the phones. Of course, right now it's almost impossible. Or you can go online if you created an online account and check the status of your application. Now, from the time you submit an appeal, FEMA has 90 days from the receipt of it to make a decision on your case. That's a long time when you're waiting for help. So sometimes the squeaky wheel helps to get a decision. If FEMA asks you for any other information, once you've submitted an appeal, be sure to send it as soon as you can. And you want to be sure to return any calls from FEMA. If they call you about it, they may want to reschedule an inspection. You never know what they might do. Now, generally, FEMA decisions on appeals are considered final. But if you have new or additional information not included in that appeal, or if your situation changed, you can reach out to them and see if they will reconsider. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. So after you've submitted the appeal, some other things that you might want to do, you can ask to elevate. You can call the FEMA helpline and you can ask for a tier 2 caseworker. Now it's pretty early in the process, so FEMA is probably hiring a bunch more staff. So they may not have as many of those tier 2 caseworkers right now, but it is something that you can do while your appeal is pending. You can reach out for legal help and we may be able to us or maybe some other organization or even a private attorney might be able to help you with your claim. And something else that is sometimes very effective is reaching out to your local congressman or your senator's office, sometimes state, usually federal level, but you could also reach out to state level and see if they will contact FEMA on your behalf to find out what is going on with your case. So with that said, I am now going to turn it over to Constance, and I will attempt to keep up with your slides, Constance.
Thanks,
Do you
Laura.
want to take some questions right quick, Laura?
Sure.
Just a couple of things that this came up a couple of times. So I just want to see about the shared household rule. Someone asked, how does that work for roommates, or if someone that was staying with them filed for FEMA with their address?
Well, if it's a roommate situation and you can demonstrate to FEMA's satisfaction that you were each had your own expenses, if you can demonstrate, hey, we were roommates, we're not a couple, we're not a family, we're not related, I'm paying for this, and I'm paying for my own groceries, I'm paying for half of the, whatever your situation is with the rent, they will sometimes allow separate application for a true roommate situation. But if FEMA determines that you're really acting more like a couple, they probably won't. Now, what they use to make those determinations sometimes is a little bit of a mystery, but I have seen them approve roommates for separate assistance. Now, if somebody was temporarily staying with you, most likely they're going to consider that person a member of your household. Really, I think it really just depends on like how long they've been with you, and kind of what their situation was. So they may not give that person. So let's say they might approve that individual for personal property assistance, like if their stuff was damaged, but they very likely would not approve both folks in that same household for like rental assistance or maybe other kinds of temporary housing assistance. So, but every situation is a little bit different. So if you got a denial on that, certainly that would be something that you could try to build a case for on an appeal. What else do you have?
Okay, and there was another question about if credit card statements would suffice in place of receipts.
I think it could. You know, I would definitely try that in case you couldn't get receipts. You know, and most credit card statements have enough detail where you could see where the, you know, merchant was, like if it's a hotel or gas or whatever it might be. It might be enough. Hopefully it would be. What else you got?
There's a question here. It's not specific to FEMA, but it's more about just contractors and how do you confirm that it's not a scammer and that they're legitimate?
If somebody is a contractor with FEMA, they usually have like a FEMA ID, identification number, or if they're coming to your home, they're definitely going to have some kind of documentation. But that is, you know, the texting service that FEMA has and the online assistance, I don't know how much documentation they put in there in terms of what actions they may be taking. I think most of the time it is usually just showing you decisions on your case. I don't know that it's necessarily showing you, you know, we're sending an inspector or expect a call. The online application is a little bit newer. And so this is really the first big disaster that we're working where FEMA has used the online assistance, but they should have an ID number. And if they're coming to your home, they should have a documentation with them. What else do you have?
I think we covered all the rest of them in the
Okay,
presentation so
cool.
far. I think that's it.
Gotcha. All right, Constance.
All right. Thanks, Laura. Hi, my name is Constance Tuyay. I'm a staff attorney at Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. I'm in the Employment and Benefits Unit. I'm here to talk to you about two broad topics today, disaster unemployment assistance and SNAP. For disaster unemployment assistance, it is ran by the Louisiana Workforce Commission. It's a state agency. They implement regular state unemployment insurance. As we've seen in the past year, COVID, also known as pandemic unemployment insurance assistance. And what we're talking about today is disaster unemployment insurance assistance, which I'll refer to as DUA, so I stop stumbling for the rest of the presentation. So this is Hurricane Ida specific. And it provides assistance to people who have either lost their jobs or their jobs are interrupted as a direct result of Ida. And the parishes that it includes are the same parishes that have been deemed a disaster under the FEMA household independent persons eligible. So those 25 parishes you saw earlier and the ones on the map here are the parishes that fall under eligible persons affected. So, and the citizenship is the same. You have to be a United States citizen, a non-citizen, national, or a qualified alien. And to dig further into eligibility, it's really important that we understand, and this was a point of confusion during pandemic unemployment assistance, and I imagine it'll be a point of contention here. Regular state unemployment insurance, supersedes disaster unemployment insurance. So when you first apply, when you go on, and we'll go into filing and applying and filing for your claim, but when you first apply, you're considered for regular UI. And if you don't fall under that umbrella, then you're considered for DUA, right? And DUA is for unemployed workers or self-employed individuals. So those would be your 1099 contract workers and your self-employed persons. And you have to have become unemployed as a direct result of the disaster. And you have to be ineligible to receive regular state unemployment insurance benefits. So persons that would fall under that category are obviously 1099 contract workers, but also persons that maybe didn't have enough income in the brackets that LWC assesses when they're determining if you're eligible for regular state UI, or if they didn't have multiple periods of income, they would fall under disaster unemployment assistance. So if you're already receiving state unemployment insurance benefits due to COVID, they noted this on their website, but I think the majority of the state is familiar. The state opted to end PEUC and PUA COVID benefits early, ending July 31st, 2021. So I anticipate anyone that's currently using a type of unemployment insurance or receiving a weekly benefit is on regular unemployment insurance. And DUA is not available to those who, or it is available to those individuals who've become the breadwinner or major support provider due to a death of the household as a direct result of the disaster. If you were unemployed prior to the disaster, this is not for you, don't file. And I'll get into why that could hurt you later. You want to make sure you're eligible when you file. And the assistance you can expect to receive, if you're placed on regular state UI is assessed based on your prior income. It's going to be assessed sometimes after April 2020. So, and they break it into 3 months periods, and then there's a lot of math involved, and we all know attorneys hate that, but they have their algorithms on their website. But you can be assessed under state UI for as little as $10 a week or as high as $247 a week if you fall under regular UI. If you're put on DUA, eligible individuals, you'll be paid on a weekly basis. The period's set to last 27 weeks, and the maximum you can get is $247 in benefits per week. The minimum you can get is $93 per week, and that's assessed off your income eligibility. And there's a way on their website. I anticipate we're going to write several blogs on this for our website. There's a way on their website to calculate your wage-based pay per week to ensure that you're getting the correct amount based on the money and the income that you gave the agency and the information you provided to them. We can go to the next slide. So you can file a claim now. The deadline to file is October 4th. The deadline to file is October 4th. You go to louisianaworks.net. And I just want to caution, when you do file your claim, you want to try to give them all accurate information. If you provide information that is incorrect, even if it's by mistake and not your intention, it can result in the agency asking you to repay benefits that were paid to you. Real liens can be put on your property. If it's determined that the misinformation you gave was intentional and it's deemed fraudulent, you can be prosecuted. It's a state agency, and then you will also be required to pay the money back. There is an extensive process, but for the sake of time, you can appeal. Unlike FEMA, you run through a telephone hearing with an administrative law judge, and then you have a review before a board of review if you get a disfavorable decision, and then you also can file in a district court. So there's many remedies, and it might be too detailed to go into today. But if you receive a notice from the agency, the Louisiana Workforce Commission, that's not favorable, whether it be a disqualification or an overpayment, it's important to appeal every adverse decision as soon as possible within the deadline. The deadline's posted on your notice. How to appeal is posted on your notice. And the clock runs from the date on your notice that you receive. So in short, that's the gist of it. So to move into SNAP benefits, supplemental nutritional assistance programs, it's run by the Department of Child and Family Services. We're going to talk about it in two parts. If you are a SNAP recipient, you might be eligible for replacement SNAP. If you're not a current recipient, you might be eligible for DSNAP. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So for persons that currently receive SNAP benefits, depending on which parish you're in, you may be eligible for a percentage replacement for food loss due to power outages due to Hurricane Ida. So we can go to the next slide. SNAP is already approved and is processing some replacement benefits for card holders. Recipients of SNAP in 18 parishes that are outlined below that are impacted by Hurricane Ida will automatically receive a 55% replacement of their monthly allotment from August. And we anticipate that that will be returning to cards or being placed on cards by September 11th, tomorrow. So that's guaranteed. You don't need to go out and apply for that. So what happens if you're not in one of these 18 parishes? We can go to the next slide. If you lost food due to Ida, due to power outages for 24 plus straight hours, you can request replacement benefits if you're not in one of the 18 parishes we just went over. You do that by filling out a 38 form. It's a simple form. It can be found on their website, and you can either pull it, print it, or you can fill it out through your online account with SNAP. You will need to provide some documentation from your utility company. Say if you go to Energy and you provide like, hey, I was without power for 3 days, I lost food, I'm not in one of the 18 parishes, but this is to evidence that. The deadline for making this request for replacement benefits for recipients is going to be September 28th. So it's important to do that sooner than later. And this is simply how you apply. As I said, online is the fastest, most efficient way to go through your CAFE portal online. You can also do it by mail or fax. And if you have any questions, their website's very helpful. They have a Q&A section. They also, you can email them or call their helpline. So I anticipate they're bogged down like most other agencies, FEMA, LWC, calls will take time. So for persons that did not receive SNAP, that weren't a recipient prior to or during the storm, some households may be eligible to help buy groceries due to loss of income or damages or food loss during the storm. And this is known as DSNAP, disaster SNAP. But unfortunately, we're still waiting for it to be processed. It has been requested by the state agencies. We're just waiting for final approval. If authorized, it will be based on the applicant's household income, resources, disaster-related expenses. If you're a current SNAP recipient, you are not eligible for DSNAP, don't apply, because you don't want to cause an interruption in the benefits you already have. We can move to the next slide. But they are encouraging persons, the Department of Child and Family Services, they're encouraging persons to pre-register for DSNAP. If you pre-register now, you can be ready when it becomes available for you. It will speed up your application process. Many people are going to be applying for this benefit program, so it would be better to pre-register. Highly recommend doing it online if you're able. It doesn't guarantee benefits that you pre-register. You still have to go through eligibility. But I think that about wraps it up, Laura.
So I was wondering,
You can go back.
I was wondering if you could throw in something about overpayments of disaster unemployment that we're also seeing. I know it's not on the slide, but I know you guys are seeing a lot of that. Could you mention that just for a minute?
Yeah, overpayments. So if you apply for unemployment insurance, pandemic unemployment assistance, disaster unemployment assistance, and for whatever reason, job separation, not filing weekly certification or not filing weekly work searches, or the agency has a number of reasons they can disqualify you for benefits or determine that you were not eligible for the benefits you received. Maybe you misreported income and you received too high of a weekly benefit. They will assess and audit your account. You may get a call from them. And they will determine how much you were overpaid retroactively. So you can be you can be put in a situation where you're being paid for months, maybe under the wrong program, or maybe the wrong amount, or maybe wrong in its totality and you weren't eligible at all. and you did nothing wrong. You thought you genuinely thought you qualified or you were eligible, and you gave all information you had at the time. There was a mistake along the way, and now you're here. They will send you a disqualification, and either in the same day or coming days and weeks, they may attach overpayments to that account that the disqualification triggered, and it will be for the money you've already been paid. So sometimes people will see a disqualification and say they just got back into the workforce, so they quit checking their account, and then later they get these overpayments. And if you don't appeal the overpayments, you owe them, and you can put yourself in a very bad financial situation. They can put liens on your real property to get these overpayments back. They can assess penalties that raise the cost of the total overpayment. So that's why I was saying appealing all adverse decisions is important. So sometimes people don't appeal the disqualification because they're not worried about it because they're back in the workforce or for whatever reason, but they don't know that the overpayments are coming. So you have to appeal the disqualification each and every overpayment. They'll break them into multiple parts sometimes. And you'll have the right to have a hearing before an administrative law judge to discuss the overpayments and your eligibility and the disqualification. Sometimes you can be eligible for overpayment waiver. Say if you didn't commit fraud, mistake, if you gave all honest information at the time, and it would be against good conscience for the judge to ask that money back of you, because it's money you used during a disaster to support yourself and your family. And it's money you can't pay back, even with a payment program. They'll consider waiving the overpayment. But these debts don't go away if they're not addressed. So it's very important that they're appealed and you move through the process. So you don't have to have a lawyer to do it, but it is within our assistance guidelines. If you're eligible for legal aid, it is something we help with. And we do provide several how-tos on your blog if you choose to move through the appeal process yourself for an overpayment. But does that?
Yep. Thank you.
Cover it?
Do you want to take a couple other questions right quick?
Sure.
Okay, so someone asked, I was on PUA until July 31st and I was going back to work on the 27th, but that was canceled. Am I eligible for DUA?
Do you have evidence that you were returning to work, that you had work? If they have, I'm sorry, I'm used to the Q&As where I can talk back and forth with people. If they have evidence that they were going back to work, say if you have a letter from an employer saying this person was hired anticipating to start on this day, and we are not bringing them in as a direct result of the storm, there may be a chance that they could apply and be eligible for disaster unemployment assistance. But to just a general hope and anticipation of returning to work wouldn't be sufficient. It would have to be evidenced. An employer would be very helpful with that.
Okay, and this one's sort of related. Do you have to do the work search when you didn't lose your job, you just didn't have the hours because of the storm?
You just didn't have the hours. They require work searches regardless. And you can't get around not doing work searches. They have to happen or you'll be disqualified. The thing is, picking up suitable work is a big part of it. So if you already have part-time work and someone's asking you to quit that part-time work to start, and it's a different kind of work, it wouldn't be suitable. So I could really go on, and each situation is unique. You do have to file those work searches, but finding a suitable job that fits with the job that you're currently working part-time due to the storm would be hard. So complete the work searches, but know that it's okay if the work's not suitable to your needs, if that makes sense.
Okay, and then if someone's SNAP application is still pending, will that affect their DSNAP, or will DSNAP affect that?
I mean, if they were eligible for SNAP beforehand, I would recommend calling. And that's interesting because SNAP recipients aren't eligible for DSNAP, so they're in an interesting limbo period. The best advice I could give is call the agency and try to work forward with them and check on your pending status. And if you're denied, then try to move forward with DSNAP.
Okay, and then the follow-up answer to the first question was that she was scheduled for a tour on the August 27th. She's a tour guide, and so she won't be working for a few weeks. I guess, is that enough proof she had scheduled work and it was canceled because things were closed?
Yeah, I would recommend printing out the schedule, and I would, I mean, if you have a good relationship with the employer, ask for a furlough letter or evidence that they're going to be closed due to Hurricane Ida repairs and you're going to miss a couple weeks of work.
Okay, I think that's it for now.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Okay, Hannah.
Hey everyone, my name is Hannah Adams. I'm an attorney in our litigation and advocacy unit, but formerly I was working in our housing unit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about IDA-related renters' rights and just a little bit about COVID as well. So the first thing, yeah, with each of these slides, Laura, you can just go through all the bullets and yeah, I'll talk about it all at once. So on the 6th, Governor Edwards issued an order that suspends all legal deadlines from August 26th, so it's retroactive to the day of the disaster declaration, until September 24th, which is roughly 30 days. This includes legal deadlines in the eviction process. That's going to include the 5-day notice period. You might know that a 5-day notice to vacate is typically required before a landlord goes to court to evict. Then there are various required delay periods, like number of days between X and Y in the eviction process. And none of those periods of time can run while this governor order is in effect. So what that means is that evictions cannot happen until after September 24th, and that's statewide. You can go right through. Yeah, so this comes at a very good time for people in Louisiana, because you might also know that on that same day, August 26th, the US Supreme Court finally, once and for all, after approximately a year, struck down the Centers for Disease Control eviction moratorium that was protecting a lot of COVID impacted renters. So just know that you might find yourself in a bind because the CDC moratorium is no longer in effect. However, evictions cannot be scheduled in Louisiana courts until after September 24th. So hopefully that will give you a little bit more time to figure out what you're gonna do, make arrangements with your landlord, or make arrangements to move. Just wanted to mention, in the absence of the CDC moratorium, there are only a couple of COVID-related renter protections left. They are both from the CARES Act, which was the original March 2020 law that was passed by Congress with a number of COVID-related aid programs. The CARES Act had a moratorium on evictions that affected some federally involved properties, but that only lasted until last summer, 2020. However, there is a 30-day notice requirement that did not expire. That basically says that if you live at a property with a federally backed mortgage, that would be like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Federal Housing Administration, Road Home, and your landlord is trying to evict you for non-payment of rent, they have to give you 30 days notice rather than the typical 5-day notice required under Louisiana law. This also affects properties where the property participates in a federal subsidy program. So if you live at an apartment building and there are some Section 8 tenants there, or you have a Section 8 voucher or a supportive housing voucher or something like that, you are protected by this 30-day notice provision. Number two is if you live at a property where your landlord has a federally backed mortgage, again, for example, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and they're in forbearance, meaning they're not currently paying their mortgage payments because they were given a break by the mortgage company, you cannot be evicted for non-payment while they are in forbearance. So if they don't have to pay their mortgage right now, you also get a break when it comes to eviction for non-payment. They're also not supposed to charge you late fees or issue a notice to vacate. Next slide. So now I'm going to move into some IDA-related questions that come up a lot. The sort of first one I've been getting a lot is if you are displaced because of IDA, for example, many people evacuated due to lack of power for a week or more, do you still have to pay rent? What Louisiana law says about this is that where your property becomes uninhabitable, partially destroyed, or its use is quote unquote substantially impaired, you are not entitled to a reduction of rent if that is because of circumstances outside of your landlord's control. So like an act of God, hurricane, something like that. So if it's just because of the hurricane that you can't live in your house, then unfortunately under the law, you're not entitled to a reduction in rent. Your rent is still owed. Now, some landlords might voluntarily give you a rent reduction or say you don't have to pay rent for, you know, this prorated period of time, but the law doesn't entitle you to it. Now, you should check your lease with all of these things, because under Louisiana law, your lease is going to control if it conflicts with Louisiana law. Now, I will say that if the damage to your unit, if you're partially displaced because of your landlord's neglect or failure to make pre-storm repairs, we've seen a lot of that. Like, you know, you had a work order in for months about, you know, your ceiling leaking, and then in the storm, the ceiling collapses, that type of thing. Then you might be entitled to a rent reduction in that kind of case. How do you navigate that? The law is a bit unclear. At least one court has said you're supposed to go to court and get a judge to decide, or you're supposed to negotiate it with your landlord. Obviously, that's not feasible for everyone. So just know that it might end up being a defense to eviction for non-payment if you are displaced for a period of time due to circumstances not just external to your lease and your landlord. If it's your landlord's neglect that caused you to be displaced, you may be entitled to a rent reduction. If you face eviction related to non-payment in this context, I highly encourage you to seek legal counsel. Next slide. So what about this question? Can your landlord evict for storm damage? I've been getting a bunch of calls about this. Apartment complexes just giving everyone a 5-day notice, storm damage, please leave. Again, check your lease. Some leases have something called a force majeure clause or an act of God clause. And that again is going to control. But what the law says is it depends on how damaged the property is. So if the home is totally destroyed, then yes, your landlord can evict you. Under Louisiana law, if the leased thing, meaning your unit, presumably, not the entire complex, not somebody else's unit, but if your unit is wholly lost or destroyed, and it's not your landlord's fault, excuse me, the lease terminates as a matter of law. Now, your landlord, I'm going to get to this in a moment, your landlord still has to go to court to evict you. They can't just throw your stuff out, but your landlord may be entitled to terminate your lease. Now, the flip side of this is that you also can terminate your lease if your house is totally destroyed. If you're stuck in a lease for the next 6 months, but you can't return home because of storm damage, you may be entitled to terminate your lease. I would give written notice to your landlord and take very good pictures of the condition you leave the apartment in, and also the conditions that necessitated you moving early. In addition, you want to make sure to return the keys. If the house is sorry, go back for 1 second. Sorry, if the house is not totally destroyed, but only partially destroyed, or its use substantially impaired, for example, there's no electricity, your landlord is not entitled to evict you under the law. You are still entitled to move out early if your use is substantially impaired, but your landlord does not have that right. This is a very specific distinction in Louisiana law. Your landlord only has the right to evict you if your home is lost or totally destroyed. So I just want to draw that distinction. The law, unfortunately, as usual, does not provide a lot of detail about what any of these terms mean, but that's the basic framework we're working with here. Next slide, please. So next question, can your landlord evict you without going to court? No. Your landlord, even if your leased property is completely destroyed, your landlord has a right to terminate your lease early, or maybe you have a clause in your lease that gives your landlord that right. Your landlord still has to go to court to evict you. They cannot just lock you out, throw your stuff on the curb, say, hey, property's destroyed, goodbye. They have to go to court and get an eviction judgment. And like I just said, evictions aren't happening in Louisiana until the end of the month. New Orleans courts aren't even open, I know, until the 19th. So you're gonna have a few weeks. Now, I will say that the law only, go back, Laura, only allows your landlord to terminate your lease and take possession without going to court in one circumstance, and the bar is very high. If they have a reasonable belief that the property is abandoned, they can go in and take possession. The law says what that means. Evidence of abandonment is like, there's no furniture in the house, everything is out. They haven't seen any proof of occupancy. Nobody's been there for months. Someone turned in a key or left it on a counter or something. I mean, that is what the law defines as abandonment. Abandonment is not like you evacuated from the storm along with 50% of the city and you're not back yet. I've been hearing a lot about this, people getting notices saying, if you don't come back to remove your stuff by X date, it's considered abandoned. That is not a thing. A landlord can't just decide that a property is abandoned because they'd like to get in there faster. So the way that you can protect yourself here is tenants should notify your landlord in writing. I suggest a text message telling your landlord that you are temporarily evacuated, where you are, and that you plan to return and that you have not abandoned the property. That way your landlord can't turn around and say, oh, I thought they had abandoned. I would suggest doing that as soon as possible if you haven't already. Next slide. And by the way, I will say that a landlord who illegally evicts by, for example, disposing of a tenant's belongings when they had not abandoned the property and without going to court can be liable for substantial damages. Okay, so is your landlord obligated to make repairs? Yes, Louisiana law and your lease agreement, no doubt, requires your landlord to make necessary repairs in order to keep your home livable. If your landlord doesn't do that, you can't just not pay rent. You have a couple options. You may be able to get out of your lease early, or you may be able to do something called repair and deduct. Repair and deduct is a process where you give your landlord notice in writing of a necessary repair. You have to document that the repair is in fact necessary. And then if the repairs are not made in a quote reasonable time, you can actually pay to have someone make the repairs yourself and then deduct that from a future month's rent. You can't hold your rent and pay it late with the deduction. You actually have to pay your rent, front the money for repairs, and then deduct it from future rent. So obviously this is not an option for everyone who doesn't have a lot of extra cash on hand, but that's what Louisiana law provides for. Next slide. And then here's kind of the kicker. Can your landlord displace you to make repairs? Unfortunately, yes, in certain circumstances. The law says that if there is a necessary repair, they cannot be postponed until the end of the lease. So not like, you know, your landlord would like to paint the house green instead of blue. But like if there is a repair that really can't wait, your landlord is entitled to make the repair even if it causes you inconvenience or temporarily displaces you. Now, and your landlord is not required to pay for a hotel, but depending on the circumstances, you may be entitled to a reduction of rent while you are displaced, or you might be entitled to not have to pay rent while you are displaced. Again, this is kind of a tricky clause that you should be aware of. You know, we say that landlords need to give you reasonable notice before entering your home, but obviously in a hurricane kind of circumstance, you might have a leak that needs to be repaired immediately. You might still be evacuated. Your landlords are permitted to make necessary repairs that cannot wait. Next slide. And then can you end your lease early if your home is damaged? In many cases, yes. You want to check your lease again because that's going to control. Like I mentioned before, if your home is totally destroyed, your lease automatically terminates. You can give written notice, take good pictures, and turn in your key and move. If your home is partially destroyed, if your use is quote unquote substantially impaired, again, you use your judgment. The law doesn't really define that. You may be entitled to get out of your lease early. And then if you are displaced for a substantial amount of time because repairs are being made, you may also be entitled to get out of your lease early. With all of these circumstances, I would give your landlord as much written notice as possible. Be sure to turn in your key and take very good pictures, both of the damage that caused you to have to move early, so that you can explain it to a judge if that becomes necessary, and also the condition you left the property. You should be entitled to get your security deposit back through the normal process if you move early because your home is not livable. What you should do is send a demand letter when you move out, asking for the deposit back and providing a forwarding address where it can be sent. Wait 30 days, and if you don't receive it back or some kind of accounting of why you didn't receive it back, you can take your landlord to small claims court. Next slide. Last thing I wanted to mention is that there is still a substantial amount of emergency rental assistance available across the state, across the country, really. This is if you have COVID-related economic loss that caused you to fall behind on rent. The programs come from the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury. You can pay up to 12 months of back rent and up to 3 months forward. For IDA affected parishes, I've listed the contact information. The basic rule is that every parish except for the 7 biggest parishes in the state, you apply through the lastaterent.org website. And then for the other parishes, those 7 exceptions, you have to go through their individual program. So I've listed how to get in touch with those various programs in the IDA impact area. Next slide. That's it for me. Happy to take questions.
So the only question I see right now is, if a home was sold prior to the storm, can the new homeowner evict the tenant?
Yes, that's a great question. So one thing I didn't mention that I should mention is that if you are a month-to-month tenant rather than in a fixed-term lease, so basically if you lived in a house for a year and didn't renew your lease, most likely you're month-to-month under Louisiana law. That means that your landlord can evict you for any reason or no reason at all with just as little as 10 days notice before the end of the month. So if your house sold prior to the storm or at any time, the new owner does not need to follow your old lease. They're not bound by your old lease unless it's recorded in the registry of mortgages and conveyances, which it would only be if you had spent $150 to do so. And so the new landlord is not required to follow the lease, and they can give you notice that they want possession of the property, unfortunately.
Okay, that's the only question for you. There's a follow-up question for Constance.
One thing, just let me add one quick thing to that, which is that your landlord, the new owner, still needs to go to court in order to evict you. They can't just put you out. That's all.
Okay, and so the other question for Constance, let me just get back to it, sorry. Would work searches in another state be accepted if you were in another state due to evacuation, or does it have to be a work search in Louisiana?
See, that's a good question, and that's in a lot of the research I've been doing too, because what about people that are displaced that have to do work searches, but you're receiving benefits from Louisiana state agencies. So, and you're basing them off of being a Louisiana resident, right? So you have to do work searches in the area, but if you're displaced, I mean, you're obviously welcome to take new work in another place and do work searches there, but you have to do the work searches through the hire account that are based in the area that you're filing from. And the thing with that is, if you're displaced, you can't accept new work, but you still have to do the work searches. And that's when each situation is unique. And this is general advice, not specific, but say like I'm displaced right now and I was doing a work search and I was offered a job back home. I can't drive from Pensacola, Florida to a job 5 days a week. You know, it's just not suitable work at this time, you know, and that's where work suitability really comes in. I don't know if that answers the question as totality. I mean, if you plan on relocating and staying where you're at, that might be a good question for the agency, but to my understanding, because I've been trying to dig into this more because I feel like it's going to be a big question with displaced persons, you have to work search in the state you're filing in. But I mean, that's as far as I guess I can answer that.
Okay, and then there's another question here. If you used vacation hours to be able to get a full paycheck, would you be eligible for DUA if you paid the employer back the vacation hours so those can be used later?
So they use vacation hours but paid them back?
Well, I'm guessing they want to pay them back to see if they're eligible for DUA if they do that. So they've used their vacation to make sure they still got a full paycheck because their office was closed for a week. And so they want to know if they pay that back, would they be eligible for DUA?
You're only eligible for DUA on the weeks that you file. So if that week is already passed, then they wouldn't be able to go back retroactively, but they could start filing now.
Okay, I don't see any other questions.
So thanks everyone for listening. The last slide we had just gives a couple of resources. It lists our disaster line again. There's also an online free service to anyone. The Louisiana State Bar Association has a program called Online Free Legal Answers. So you can submit a question and an attorney, volunteer attorney, will provide a response back to that. I think their income guidelines are about twice as high as ours. And they just ask you for like a self-certification that your income is below a certain amount. Also, there is a modest means directory. That just basically means attorneys that agree to pay, to charge lower than market rate costs for folks that may not be eligible for free legal services, but still unable to really afford typical private attorney rates. So some of those resources are there. And thanks everybody for popping on.
And just to add, for everyone who's asked, the slides and recording are all going to be up on our website very soon.
Thank you.